I'm joined today by Dr. Hammer.
Hello.
And Steez from Salt Clan.
G'day, how you going?
And we're going to talk a little bit about the Logar Valley AASv1 layer. That's going to be the first map for the ISKT season. Now, on this map you have US versus militia, and the biggest difference between those two is the heavy armor and the scopes for the riflemen for the US side, whereas militia is restricted only to the marksmen with scopes. So they have a couple less scopes than the US side. Now the opening strategies for both teams here is usually rushing is what people are looking for, and the rushing potential in this map is for both teams. It's this opposite central flag. So militia has north district that they can rush, whereas US can rush south district. There is some potential to rush south residents for US, but it's hard because the hills up in this area make it easy for militia to have overview on any vehicles incoming down the road towards south residents.
Yeah, I more or less agree. I don't think in ISKT you're going to see many deep rushes to the residents, because it's too easy to counter it with a good team.
Yeah. The hill just west of north residence is a frequent hotspot for activity, since militia quickly rushes to that, has ability to quickly rush to that area and block off any approach from north residents towards north DC. So that's usually what militia does. Now the US has more using their scopes. They make more use of the hills up in the east of North District here to take out enemy infantry incoming from the west on the hills there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the plan for both teams is pretty straightforward. Ironically enough, because I consider this one of the most dynamic maps in the game. The US simply want to play on that eastern wall. And the militia simply just want to use their mobility to their advantage. The US are very solid. The militia are able to move around quickly, develop quick fobs, get their SPGs in place, and I think that the beauty of this map is a lot of dynamic play because, let's put it straightforward and honest, the militia are very underpowered. So I think this is a very interesting map, especially to analyze.
It's pretty interesting the way it works with down through that bit there, as you said, that eastern wall. It's such a steep drop off in vertical height that makes it so much easier for US to get a good shooting position, especially with vehicles, as opposed to the opposite side where it's a gradual decrease with lots of trees and stuff in the way.
Yeah, and you're starting to see more and more and more the militia not rushing as much and kind of slow rolling it and just simply trying to control the hills. I mean, I've seen a lot of times, especially in pub games, as credible as that is, the idea of simply just trying to control this side of the map, just rushing, not even the point, but that side of the map to gain control of the hill. Because if the U.S. are solidified up, and I call it Crow Hill here, then it's almost GG, locking down the grip points with MG fire, their optics. It's really hard to play against if they get solidified in that sector. And you'll see exactly a striker, Humvee, something on that mark, and it just can be very painful to play against. So you'll see a very common, I call it a Crow Hill rush. Take it with SPG, scout car maybe placed on the western hillside. I've seen this tactic a lot, where they just try to get eyes on across and stop that seal of the U.S. sealing up the whole eastern side. Because if they control those hills, it's very hard to control the bleed point on North DC and South DC, and controlling those two cap points is vital, especially in this layer.
Yeah, I mean, so from those two positions, those two hills, like Crow's Hill or Shooter Hill and Shooter Squared. I mean, from Shooter Squared, you can see from South Residence in a wide arc all the way to North Residence. So all of this lowland, you've only got the buildings to protect you. So yeah, if militia want that mobility and that ability to get around, then they need to control this, as you just said.
Exactly. It's kind of like an indirect defense for the grip point, and I think a big time strategy is, like I said, just being able to control Crow Hill and not rushing and dedicating your resources to, I love to call this, loving the slow roll, being able to just push past the entire U.S. forces and anticipate a possible South Residence or South DC rush. I think is a very popular kind of method of going about this game and just getting immediate counterplay on the Eastern Hill.
So then the big thing though is that's more or less pub play, and so then the next step is how do you then tackle that in 24v24, where you want to do the same stuff, you want to control that, you want to make sure you're doing all that, but at the same time you've got not that many guys and you need to be putting pressure on the caps. So what I think is it really comes down to, like, everyone wants to call this an infantry dominated map, but if a team can find good spots for their vehicles and have those one or two guys get dominance, it'll actually be quite interesting.
Yeah, and militia doesn't have much of a counter to vehicles either. They have SPG-9, but that takes 2-3 hits, and that's hard to aim. Or you have the SPG-9 emplacement, which is a static emplacement, so that's easily taken out by scopes. So they don't have much they can do about vehicles up on the opposite side of the valley unless they get infantry across there. And that's what I've seen from the CCFN fights and so on. When you have US with vehicles up there, the only time they've been contested is if they let militia infantry RPGs get up into those hills up in this area here. You just, if you get some militia infantry up there with RPGs, you can take out those US vehicles. But that's just a matter of the US not dropping the ball on letting any militia getting close. So the only time that happens is if they let people get up there.
Yeah, and I think there's been so many ways that have been thrown around to stop this U.S. dominance, and I think as a good point that Steez brought up is, in a pub match, you got 40 people on each team, ideally. And in an ISKT game, you got 24v24, so you only got so many hands to throw around. So a possible way to counteract this U.S. counterplay on that Eastern Hill is just a quick mortar fob. If you got two guys that know how to mortar, I mean, just area retention. Just mortar the heck out of them. Stop them from getting up on Crow's Hill, and then allowing the rest of your team to push through. Even the use of fire teams, just the 3-man, 4-man teams prowling around is enough to maybe distract, remove a fob, hit a couple of vehicles with lats and hat, do something to take down those guys in the Eastern Hill. Because if you control the Eastern Hills, you control the game on both sides. And I think that's why I love this map, because it's so straightforward yet so dynamic, because there's such a deficit on both teams. Or on the militia team, I mean.
Yeah, and on this map, it's the size of it. You can place a fob pretty much anywhere, and you can have mortar range. So
yeah, exactly. It's such a small map.
Now, for militia, it is vital to just stay in the game. To stay in the game, it's vital to be present down in the city here or town, or up in the hills here. If they get pushed off there, they're gonna have to fight through down on the hills there, and then you have that problem with the US up in the hills on the east side here, firing across with the crows and scopes. So if the militia gets pushed back to a south district or beyond, do you see any potential for them to get back from there? Because that's something I don't think I have ever seen.
I always believe in potential. I very rarely like to give up in a situation like that, but to be honest, it's hard. It is not easy to remove the U.S. from South DC once they're ingrained. That is a challenge. But I think it's doable. I think 4 guys in a Logi can do anything, as I like to say in my games. Get some kind of attack fob down, get bodies on the point. At that point, I would be surging for immediate an immediate counterplay. As soon as they get South DC, you got to kind of work for that double newt because they're so ingrained. You got to throw everything in the kitchen sink at South DC. Just stop them from getting there. Stop them from solidifying South DC because that's the bleed point. You know, they get South DC. I mean, that's almost GG. You gotta solidify it, counterattack immediately. I don't even care if I get a double newt. I want to get bodies in South DC, control the center of the map, just like in chess. Control the center of the board. If you can do that, you can always come back from South Residence, is my kind of philosophy. You can get another fob down. Like I said, 4 guys in a Logi can do anything. Bodies in the point, FFO style. Just get boots on the ground. And that's kind of my philosophy behind it. If South DC gets capped, I'm not freaking out. I want immediate counterplay. You can't slow down. If they cap it, you gotta think, what am I doing? Where's my Logi? Where's my fob going? It's my first instinct. I don't like to give up. It's the one thing I don't like to do. So I think it's definitely doable. It just requires a little bit of magic and a little bit of urgency.
Yeah, it's certainly tricky. And this, yeah, like I say, if US do get to South DC, you've got to think they've just made their area of what they need to control so much smaller. You know, if we're talking about those 2 hills again, now they just need to control this. Like, that's all they need to worry about. So, and they got the bleed cap, they can solidify that, they can just sit there and control that. And then, so yeah, the only way that militia gets in is a nice close fob, kind of like what Hammer was talking about. And how do you get a nice close fob if they've got vehicle dominance and overwatch? So, yeah, it's almost, I mean, there's a few ways you can do it. You're going to want it, like, the best way would be they overextend, and then you can slip in. But, I mean, that's relying on the other team to make a mistake, and if they're a good team, then you can't really rely on that. So, yeah, again, it comes down to the timing of it, the fact that you're going to need, like, Canary and then push off. You're going to need to do multiple things at the same time. You're going to get a prepper fob while gaining control of this, and then, yeah, it'd be fun times.
Yeah, maybe you can get a techie or something to kind of just to up on the hill, or a scout car, something. Maybe mortars are still up. You know, something to hit these hills. Keep them thinking about their own health for a little while. You got to do some kind of indirect honeypot to get that Logi flying in the South DC. I mean, you just got to get that radio. I don't even care if the radio and the hab are in the middle of the road. Just get the spawn point down at that point. If they're up on there, we got mortar support, some kind of techie laying fire. That might be more than enough that you need. But if they get South DC, I'm thinking immediate counterplay. I don't care what it is. I don't care if the Logi is a quarter health. We need to get that fob down. I mean, we can't let them solidify South DC if they do cap it. Like Steez brought up, it's extremely tricky because if they got South DC, that means they control these hills. And if they're a good team, they're not letting go of those hills because those hills are pretty good. South Residence is probably under heavy pressure. If they're a good team, they probably already got their attack fob down somewhere near the green bubbles here. I mean, it's an obvious spot, but I mean, it works. You got to stop the U.S. from creeping up on the hill. But as Steez was saying, if they're overextended, they're overextended. Work for the double newt. Try to retain the bleed as much as possible and just get boots in the ground in the center of the map. Somehow you got to stop that hill counterplay with the optics. Mortars, techies, as I said, is the only way I can think of. Even if you have a fire team of 3 to 4 guys are still in the hills, maybe they can go and wreck some kind of chaos, distract them, honeypot off, do something. I mean, you got to do something in this situation. The worst thing you could do is nothing. So it's tricky. It's not easy. I think relinquishing the U.S. from South DC is probably one of the hardest tasks in the game. Especially when you're playing against good players, it's difficult.
And then, so that brings up the other point of, so what do you do when you realize that that's not going to happen? Because there's still viable options. I mean, that's not a huge bleed. I think it's 4 tickets a minute. I'm not sure. So, I mean, the other option, of course, is US assets cost more. So, milking those assets with SPGs, RPGs, fire teams through here, like you say, is going to be viable. But the counter to that is US infantry dominance. So the only way you can stay reasonably level on tickets is if you're like keeping even on kills, which is quite hard to do.
I was talking with Backpack a little bit about kind of a similar situation, and he told me there's no such thing as magic tricks in competitive, and I completely agree with him. I mean, the guy knows what he's talking about. But I think what I was talking about is just limiting your losses. Maybe at this point in the match, and there's certain situations, like you brought up a great point, Steez. Maybe you just want to like let them have the bleed and maybe lose the game by like, I don't know, 20 tickets, 50 tickets, take out their assets and try to close that margin of deficit, that deficit of tickets. Just close it so you can maybe come with a W the next game as the U.S. I think I view this map as a game of chess at high level. The white has the advantage. They get the first move. Usually white is trying to attack and trying to come out with a W, and black is usually aiming for a draw. They don't want to lose. They want to aim for that draw, and I think it's kind of a very similar situation. The U.S. is white, and the militia are the black pieces. The black pieces are aiming for that draw, or at least that semi-deficit that we're talking about, limiting their losses. And I think that's a beautiful way to play the map if you're just trying to simply maybe limit them to Southeast C. Say everything goes, worst comes to worst, and they got Southeast C. Maybe just, like you said, Steez, take out their assets, limit the ticket loss. So next round, you can come out with a W as the Americans, and it's very situational. But one thing's for sure, as the Americans, you gotta come out on top. If you lose as the Americans, that's not good.
Yeah, and for the US, it is a little harder for them to advance from South District to South Residence than it is for militia to advance to North Residence, basically just because all the area south here is just a slope down towards the north, so there's no cover there for the US, and there's fields all the way in here. So it's a little harder for them to advance in South Residence, so you can set up a pretty tough defense around the South Residence flag, whereas North Residence, it's a lot easier to get in.
You can get a very good active defense on South Res, 100%. And the only thing that stops that is if US are just outshooting militia, which is possible. A lot of it comes down to raw shooting potential in this map. Like, there's obviously vehicle play and map control is really important, but also, especially as US, you can make use of everyone having M4s and having optics and stuff like that, and punish, especially through here, punish the militia, then you can get that advance. But if the biggest thing for militia is having that potential to keep up the shooting game, and if you can do that, then yeah, you can either keep it in the central or keep it to here. Anything that doesn't go back to mechanic shop as militia is a good game.
Yeah, right, exactly. I agree, and I think what you said, you brought up, Steez, is a big point. Shooting is one thing, but I think positioning and map control, I think, is big on everything. I think a great player once told me squad is 80% placement, and I completely agree. I think that opening that you play as a militia is vital, and it will dictate the win or loss immediately. You got to place your SPGs, your scout cars in good spots right off the bat. Get them in a good place. You got to get good fobs up. You got a couple things to accomplish as a militia right off the bat, and I think if you do it solid, you can come out with a win. I mean, I've seen the Americans get pushed back all the way to Poppy Farm multiple times, all points capped. It's just a matter of playing it correctly, and timing is vital as well. When to send the Logi where, if you think you got North DC under control, are you gonna try to overextend and get a fob up at North Res? Or how aggressive do you want to play? Are you just gonna kind of just leave the casino and hold on to North DC and not get greedy? Or it's I think that's an interesting point too. What do you do if you have an advantage as a militia? Do you go for the dagger, or do you just sit on the bleed?
But yeah, it's a hard one.
I
mean, it's the sort of thing where you really don't want to overextend, because that is so costly to do that as militia.
That's bad news bears.
And that's another feature of this map in terms of overextension. It's really quick to get to the second flag in the order. So, for instance, if from Poppy Farm, if you take North Residence, you can just go straight across here because it's this winding snake shape. So it's really fast to get across from one flag to the other. If you're on a roll, if you're on steamrolling, then you can easily keep that momentum going quick, because you can basically react just as quickly as the enemy can to his own flags.
Yeah, and then that again comes back to good vehicle play. Like, as US, if you have vehicles in good spots, when they try and do a reset, you try and catch them and destroy that logi. And then on the other end, which you haven't talked about yet, is militia mines. Like, mining around the roads to US main, so that you're stopping US from either resetting quickly or going for that swift back cap because their logi's just taken out for like 6 minutes.
Oh yeah. If they lose their logis early on, they're fucking toast. Pardon my French, but I mean, removing those spawn points, if you can get it indirectly through a logi, it's just that's really good. If you can get that in as a militia, you can send a 2-man crew and a techie doing a miracle job right off the bat, somehow removing their logi. That would be awesome. I mean, that's ideal though. This, as the militia, it's a sharp game, as I like to call it. But what about rushing as a militia? I mean, do you in a competitive scene, rushing something ridiculous, like could you go to Poppy Farm quick enough? Probably not.
No, I don't think so. Because so the thing with public play is what usually happens is you've got 2 good squads and some dude that's never squad there before, and so what you're getting is guys rushing in the good squads or going to least to the midpoints, and so you're just shouting as you go by, "Hey, can you cap Poppy Farm for me?" And in comp, that's not how that works. In comp, you've got a dude going there as quick as you can because you want to get those caps quick, so that if you do get a successful hold on the map, that you are capping. And it's not viable. Like even North Res and South Res, like possible, but a good team's gonna have a Humvee and 2 LATs sitting there, or an SPG 2 LATs sitting there, and you're just going so hard just to get there in time to do the block.
Yeah, it's dubious.
It's only viable if you commit most of your team to it, so that you've got a bit of, and then you're so underplayed, and then of course if so militia do get North Res, what does US do? And the answer is just don't panic and solidify this and then play it out.
Yeah, just push your forces through, one point at a time. Yeah, the more and more I play the match, I don't think the rush is viable at all. I mean, I like to call them realistic rushes. You know, North DC, South DC, go straight for the bleed point. I think that is completely viable. But I think going to North residence and South residence is, as you were saying, okay in a pub match. But it's competitive. I mean, you got to think they're gonna be thinking about this ahead of time. So, yeah, I completely agree. I don't think rushing North residence or anything ridiculous like Poppy Farm it will even work. It'd be kind of funny if someone tried it. You know, never know. But yeah, I think North DC and South DC are extremely, extremely, extremely more prone to be rushed, and I think it's important to rush those points because of simply bleed control. Even though it's 4 tickets per minute, it's still nice to have that cap ratio.
I mean, don't get me wrong, like if militia do get North residents, that's great.
Yeah.
Because they're stopping any bleed. If they can have like good access to the east side of the map for scouts and AT, then they can start milking tickets from assets. But at the same time, it's hard to do, and it means that you're leaving South DC and North DC wide open.
What about fob locations? Because I think on this map in particular, it's kind of like, well, I think it's the same size as Fool's Road, this map. Fob locations are kind of important. You see a lot of militia fobs up here trying to aim for that North DC rush, this general location. American fobs, I see this a lot over here on the South Hill. I don't know if that's any good. I doubt it is. It doesn't feel good to me. Or fobs right in South DC, I see. I've seen fobs up by North residence as the Americans. It just depends, but it's kind of an interesting topic for this map in particular.
Yeah, I think what I've seen mostly is US has one up in the north, there, one down in the south somewhere there, and militia always tries to get one inside the city because it's important for them to have a foothold inside there, so they don't have to go down the hills, and probably one near south residence, either east or west of that flag.
I think this is where you're going to see the differences between the teams, because you've got some teams that'll happily put one off objective and sort of running, and then you've got other teams that like to play a game where it's on cap and they get 360 defense and then play it differently. So it'll be interesting. I'm not going to tell you where I'm going to put my fobs, but it's certainly interesting. And it's also interesting to think again, if we go back to the mortars, like a militia mortar or a US mortar, any fob that is identified out in the open, or even like out in the open where an like a SPG or something can hit it, you're gonna have to be careful where you put it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think as the U.S., what I'm thinking is I'm not mortaring, but as a militia, I'm like I'm mortaring. You know, as the U.S., I want as much bodies and optics pushing the points and getting that fob down. Personally, I would love to put a fob right on salt.Steez as the U.S. I don't really care. I'm putting a nice Ray Lewis right in the middle of the city and just getting, like you said, 360, because as a militia, it's important to get that infiltration rolling, and I think as the U.S., it's equally as important to control the city, have at least a squad down there, team down there, and then have your optic support. As the militia, I would love mortar fob and just blowing them away on those eastern hills, something along the lines of that is a general idea. And I think every map has its generalized plan. You know, what do each side wants to do, and I think we've talked about it. The fob inside the city for the militia is key, and the U.S. is controlling that hill. Whether or not the U.S. want to be more aggressive with their fob is up to them inside the city on the hill. I don't know. It's a topic for the ages. Fob on the point or not.
Yeah, and for militia, it gets progressively harder to get a fob up the longer the longer the match progresses, because again that vehicle presence up in the hills over here by the U.S. Can lock down any logistics trucks going here or here or here, so it's hard for them to get anywhere past the hills here later in the game with logistics, unless they have good control of the match tempo of the match. If they have South District, if they are able to push up here and contest the hills, then they have a shot at getting fobs up here if they manage to push up here. But if they don't have this hill, then they're going to have a hard time getting fobs any further than up here.
Exactly. And I think it goes back to that vehicle placement at the beginning of the game. Hopefully get some kind of counterplay for the militia. Hitting those hills immediately, I think, is extraordinarily important.
It's going to be interesting. Yeah, especially like you say, like you want to control the hills with the same, again, going back to 24v24, like it comes down to individual skill level and making sure you get the most out of your guys to get as much control as they can with what you've got to play with. So you're still, doing, I mean, think about it, you got 1-2 guys on vehicles and then 2 guys on mortars. That's already 4 down, 20 left, and then you got 2 active caps or 1 active cap to control, and you still want, be sort of getting them, on their side of the map, annoying them and all the rest of it. It doesn't give you a lot to play with. So it just comes down to how good the team is, how good you can read the plays, how good you can control your extends and canary your points and all that stuff. So everyone loves to hate this map, but it really does bring out, like, it's punishing, and it shows you like who's got everything under control and who doesn't.
Definitely shows who's most creative, because you're working with such a dynamic layer. So it's kind of cool to see what the militia tries to pull out of their hat. What are they going to do? Because everyone knows what the U.S. is going to do. I mean, it's pretty, like I said, pretty straightforward. But the militia has a little bit more flexibility with how they do things. I think it's going to be very interesting how they divvy up their assets on a 24v24, where they send in the lodges. I think it's going to be very, very interesting. I'm very excited to see what this brings to ISKT.
Yeah, so to sum up about the map here, basically, I think we're all going to agree that militia will rush for North District, US will rush for South District, and they will both send the appropriate amount to North and South residents, and then the important important area for militia is to have this hill and to maintain a presence in the city here, and to get fobs up in advanced positions.
I completely agreed. I'm super, super excited for this map. I mean, I don't like the map, but I'm very excited to see the strategies, the ideas, and I think that's the greatest thing about this game is that the strategies are always evolving, and there's the people out there that are pushing it to the limits and trying something very dynamic that I'm very excited to see. I love dynamic play. I hate boring, regular Joe Schmo stuff. I want to see people really push things to the limit. I want new ideas, and I think that's what makes the game great is those people that come out and, okay, I want to try something new. I want to do something cool, something that's never been done before, and really try it, especially on a map like this. And I don't know, I'm just excited, Tartan. I'm ready for some serious squad in this map. The ideas is what I'm most excited for. I can't wait to see it.
I more or less agree with that. Yeah, like as you said before, like US side of how to play it is kind of set in stone. Obviously, there's capable of variation. There's little cheeky vehicle spots that people will find and all the rest of it, and it's always open for someone to change the game. But especially as militia, like there's a lot of room for improvement, I think, from what everyone normally does, and it'll be interesting to see if guys can find if there's a spot where you can take out a Logi on rollout, or if there's a good way to get up and block or frustrate them and gain control of areas that are usually pinned down. So it'll be good.
So stay tuned in for ISKT, and we'll see if any of our rambling here was in any way accurate. Thanks for coming, Dr. Hammer.
Yep, no problem. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for coming, Steez.
No worries.